Ted and Bob were very good friends. They have been friends for a good 10 years. They're both 20 and both of their birthdays are in May. They've also gone to the same school since elementary. The year is 1980. This year they decided they want to do something extra awesome for their birthdays. They are both dive masters, so they thought it would be a good idea to do something like scuba diving, except that this trip will not be any ordinary scuba diving. They have rented a boat outfitted with state-of-the-art marine technology that they will use to try to locate the wreck of the Titanic. It will cost a hefty $165,658, but that is no problem because their parents are filthy rich. They are hoping to find some valuable artifacts so that they can become filthy rich as well. They have maps of the ship's approximate position, but they may have to search a little bit. They have small submarines that they will use because the pressure down that far is 6,500 psi, which they could not survive in without a submarine. They are scheduled to leave from the place the Titanic was supposed to arrive, New York. "Ted," Bob yelled up the stairs, "get your stuff together because we have to leave tomorrow." "God, you're retarded." Ted responded to this with a chain of profanities that would not be acceptable to write in this story. They ended up with all of their things packed, which consisted of only one shirt apiece, but that was only after Bob threatened Ted with a lawnmower. Bob responded by starting the rusty chainsaw in the house and sawing the coffee table in half out of rage. This was normal because they both have anger disorders that makes them do things normal people wouldn't. As May 12th rolled on, the two guys got all of their luggage and hailed a taxi to drive them to the harbor. They arrived at the harbor and saw the ship Walrus, which they had rented, waiting for them in the H section of the harbor. It took them 15 minutes to walk all the way down there, and that had really set Ted off. He'd been frightening people walking by because of a loud burst of profanity. He would yell at the top of his lungs since they started the painfully long walk to the boat. The boarding was smooth and the old boat occasionally backfired and stalled while they were on their way. The equipment on the boat is state-of-the-art, but the boat itself is just rubbish. The captain of the boat, Smirnoff, thinks that for a 7-year-old boat it runs quite well. There are only 3 people that work on the boat. One was Smirnoff the captain. Fred Bob, the first mate, was the other. Lastly was the cleaner boy, known just as Varmint. Ted and Bob agreed with the captain because they were surprised that it ran at all. They had been traveling for a good while, and Ted and Bob had only 6 fistfights over silly things, which is not that many for them. They arrived at the coordinates from the map and turned on the equipment to look at the bottom of the 12,500 feet deep ocean where the Titanic is resting under. The only problem was that they saw nothing. This caused Ted to start breaking lamps and flipping tables while yelling rather disturbing profanities. A few minutes later, they came upon a massive shape on the bottom which they identified as the Titanic. It was time to get into the submarines. After getting suited up and into the subs, Ted and Bob found themselves in almost 2.5-mile deep water. The windows of the submarine need to be 8 inches thick if they are to sustain such pressure. As they were slowly cruising down, an enormous black shape materialized from the darkness, making Ted yell, making Bob yell. The Titanic. It was the biggest thing they had ever seen. They tried to look down the 882.75-foot ship, but they could not see that far. They know, however, that it had split into 3 pieces, and they had come to the middle one. They also know that the bow is 60 feet below the ocean in mud, so they wouldn't be able to see the beginning of the 230-foot gash in the hull. It would be impossible to see the other one because it had landed 1,970 feet away from the other one they were at. They activated the camera arms that were equipped with video cameras so that they could see and put them into the midst of the ship. They could see the 1-inch thick hull where it had been ripped apart like paper. As they came to the cargo hold, they spotted some boxes that had tipped over and the contents looked interesting. They were wrapped up packages of some sort and they looked like promising artifacts, and Ted and Bob were running low on air, so they both used the arms on the subs to retrieve 1 box each. They were big boxes and surprisingly light, so they were easy to take up. They broke the surface and the sun hit them, which made them protect their eyes because of the blackness under the ocean. They were sure happy they didn't have to go into the water, like when on the night the Titanic sank, the water was almost freezing. They took their finds on board and could hardly wait to look at what they were. "This is quite awesome," remarked Ted. "I'm sure we will be filthy rich when we get back to shore." They unwrapped one of the packages, and remarkably it had stayed dry. Powder fell out from the ripped open package. "What a rip-off!" yelled Ted furiously. "Wait a minute, Ted," replied Bob. "I think this is cocaine." Yar, that be cocaine, said Smirnov. I've seen that many times. You boys have yourself a fortune there, you know. Ted and Bob were so happy they almost kissed each other. It got quite awkward after that, so they didn't speak to each other for most of the trip home, but when they were almost there, they talked for the last time as middle-class people. Well, Ted, it looks like we'll be filthy rich now, doesn't it? Asked Bob. Yes, Bob, it certainly does, replied Ted. It certainly does.